Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back to a time when the world could change in a single day, when the rivers were highways for warriors, and one wrong decision could doom a city for centuries. It's spring, 8245 CE, and the air along the banks of the Seine is thick with fog and the uncertain promise of rain. The small villages and monasteries outside Paris wake up to the sound of birds, a few bleary-eyed fishermen hauling nets, the scent of damp reeds, and if you're unlucky, a strange, unsettling rhythm in the distance. It's the heavy slap of oars and the low chant of men who have sailed farther than your mind can stretch. You squint into the morning mist, heartbeat pounding. Their shapes are taking form on the river. Long, narrow ships, carved with dragon heads, are slicing upstream, so many it's impossible to count. Each stroke brings them closer, and even before you see the flash of steel or the wild, sun-bleached hair of the rowers, you know the stories are true. The Vikings are here, and you, tucked in the trembling shadow of Paris's distant walls, are about to learn what it means when legends become reality. You feel it in your gut. You probably won't survive this, and if you do, you'll be changed forever, because tonight you're not just watching history, you're about to live it, breath by terrified breath. Before we set off down this dangerous river, hit the like button and subscribe, unless you'd rather risk facing Ragnar Lodbrok without backup. Let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what's your local time? Are you braver than the Parisians? Stick around, because you're about to witness how a single Viking fleet held Paris hostage for gold and changed European history forever. The scene is unusually quiet, except for the whisper of water against the reeds and the distant clanging of church bells. That's when you hear it, a new sound, rhythmic and growing, like 1,000 heartbeats merging into one. You're not alone in hearing it. Down the riverbank, farmers drop their baskets. A group of monks, usually so calm, freeze in the middle of morning prayer, every face turned toward the mist. Suddenly, the first prow bursts into view, a sleek, painted dragon's head, leering through the fog. Behind it, more ships, not a handful, but dozens. The largest Viking fleet France has ever seen. Their sails are striped and battered from 1,000 storms, but the men beneath them sit tall and ready, their axes and swords already gleaming in the dawn. The rowers barely glance at the frightened faces on shore. They're focused, disciplined, and terrifyingly sure of themselves. By now, panic is spreading. Chickens flap, children are swept indoors, and the bravest men rush to warn the next village. Some people run straight for the woods, clutching little more than the clothes on their backs. Others drop to their knees in prayer, whispering for the saints to save them, because everyone knows what happens when Vikings arrive. It's not just theft, it's fire, blood, and ruin. If you're lucky, you'll be left with nothing but a story to tell. The ships keep coming, gliding past burnt-out cottages and abandoned mills. The river is their road, and Paris at the heart of it is the prize. The city itself is still a day's sail away, protected by stone walls and a pair of fortified bridges. But right now, nothing stands between the Vikings and their goal. You can feel the hopelessness in the air, heavy as thunder. Somewhere among the fleet, at the prow of the largest ship, stands a man whose name the monks mutter in fear, Ragnar. He's said to be half-mad, fearless, the son of a king or a farmer, depending on who's telling the story. All you know is that when Ragnar lifts his hand, every oar pauses, every eye turns toward Paris, and you realize this isn't just a raid, it's an invasion. Still, not everyone runs. Some men grab rusty swords or farm tools, determined to defend their homes. A few old warriors, veterans from earlier Viking attacks, remember what worked and what didn't in the past. They form a hasty line at the edge of the water, trembling but defiant. You join them, gripping a wooden pitchfork and trying not to show how much your hands shake. The ships beach without ceremony, planks slam down, and the first wave of Vikings pour out, shouting, laughing, swinging axes. There's no mercy. Cottages are looted, grain stores set ablaze, and anyone who stands in the way is quickly brutally dispatched. The riverbank is chaos, shouting in Old Norse, prayers in Latin, the screams of livestock and men alike. You duck behind a tree and watch, heart pounding, as the attackers swarm through the village. After what feels like forever, the raiders regroup, tossing spoils into the ship's baskets of flour, gleaming chalices from the church, even a terrified goat or two. The Vikings don't linger, they're methodical, moving on to the next target before the sun's fully risen. You're left in the smouldering ruins, shaken but oddly grateful. They could have killed everyone, but they were in too much of a hurry. Their eyes are on something bigger. News travels faster than you'd think. By midday, Paris itself is buzzing with the tale. Messengers on horseback thunder through the city gates, shouting warnings. Market stalls are abandoned. The bishop is already in the cathedral, chanting desperate prayers. At the royal palace, King Charles the Bold receives the first reports. Vikings in unprecedented numbers, led by Ragnar, heading straight for the heart of his realm. By sundown, the Seine is crowded with ships, some already tied up at makeshift docks just outside Paris. Ragnar's men disembark in disciplined rows, camping on the river's edge, their fires flickering like a second, more dangerous city. You can smell roasting meat, hear their rough laughter, and see the glint of swords as they sharpen blades for tomorrow. For now, Paris's walls hold, but you can feel the city's nerves unraveling, thread by thread. The message is clear. The Vikings aren't just raiding, they're coming for Paris itself. And nothing, not prayer, not panic, not even a king, seems likely to stop. The campfires along the river glow long into the night, a ribbon of orange light snaking through the mist, marking exactly where the Norse fleet has settled in for the evening. You can smell the smoke even inside the walls of Paris, wafting across the water along with the sound, strange guttural singing and bursts of laughter that have nothing to do with the familiar hymns from the cathedral. Word spreads fast among the townsfolk and the soldiers posted on the city's ramparts. Ragnar Lodbrok is here in person. If you're lucky or unlucky enough to catch a glimpse through a spyglass, you spot him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with tangled hair and an air of unrushed menace, pacing along the bank. He's in no hurry. Why would he be? The Seine belongs to him now. His ships stretch from horizon to horizon, sleek and purposeful, every hull bristling with shields. They look almost alive, a pack of dragons ready to pounce, and Ragnar is their master. Inside the city, panic simmers just beneath the surface. Merchants count their coins and hide what they can. Priests lock away relics in secret vaults, then pray double time for good measure. The old men who remember the last Norse attack in the north shuffle out of the way, quietly reminding anyone who'll listen, don't try to fight them head on. They aren't like us. They don't follow our rules. Nobody listens. Nobody wants to admit just how scared they are. Back on the riverbank, Ragnar is everywhere at once. 1 minute, overseeing the unloading of supplies, the next deep in conversation with a tattooed warrior, then vanishing into the torch-lit labyrinth of the camp. There's a brutal efficiency in everything his men do. They've brought tents, armor, and enough provisions to last. When they're not sharpening blades or oiling leather, they're gambling, swapping stories, or patching wounds with a shrug and a swig of mead. But the real action happens at dawn. Ragnar assembles his chiefs near the flagship. His voice carries over the water, harsh, clipped, and peppered with jokes that make the others laugh and the captured locals wince. He's confident, even playful. Some say he's already been paid off by other rulers, walked away with chests of silver and gold from Hamburg, Rouen or Nantes. Paris, he announces, will be his masterpiece. The Frankish scouts posted on muddy hilltops and half-collapsed watchtowers watch helplessly as the Vikings fan out along the banks. Some ships are anchored midstream to block river traffic, others peel away to plunder nearby villages, collecting food, livestock, and anyone foolish enough to linger. Sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear the shouting and the clash of steel from miles away. Inside the city, every face turns toward the palace for direction. King Charles the Bold is holding emergency meetings that run deep into the night. Advisors argue about everything. Should they attack, barricade the bridges, send out peace offerings or holy relics to scare the pagans off? No one has a good answer, especially after word arrives that the king's own army is stretched thin across the kingdom, busy putting down rebellions or waiting for orders that never come. Ragnar is no fool. He knows the politics of Francia are a mess. He's counted on it. With every hour that passes, his confidence only grows. He moves from ship to ship, talking with his warriors, not just about plunder, but about strategy. He lays out the next phase with a kind of joyful precision. Test the defenses, probe the bridges, and keep the city guessing. We'll remind them, he says, what it means to fear the Sea Kings. Your job, if you're just a local caught up in this chaos, is survival. Some try to sneak away, melting into the marshes, hoping the Norse are too busy with Paris to hunt down stragglers. Others volunteer for the city watch, more out of pride or desperation than any hope of victory. Every night the bells ring longer, the prayers grow more frantic, and the city's leaders pace sleepless in their halls, muttering about the end of days. One bold group of Parisian defenders, including a handful of foreign mercenaries, decides to take the fight to the enemy. Under the cover of darkness, they slip out through a forgotten gate and try to torch a handful of Viking ships tied up on the far bank. For a moment it almost works. The smell of burning pitch and splintering wood cuts through the air, but the Norse react fast, swarming down the riverbank with axes in hand. By morning, the charred wrecks are proof to everyone inside the city that this won't be an easy fight, and the headless corpses on the sandbars send a second, quieter message. Ragnar is merciless to his enemies, but he respects a show of guts. As days pass, Ragnar starts to play mind games. He sends small groups upriver to loot farms, then returns the next day with peace offerings. Bread, fish, even a barrel of stolen wine mockingly left outside the city walls. He knows how to keep his enemy off balance. Every night, new rumors swirl through Paris. The Norsemen can't be killed. Their leader wears a magic shirt. They've brought giants from the ends of the earth. You know it isn't true, but you still keep an eye on the shadows. From the safety of their ships, the Vikings taunt the defenders. Sometimes they parade captives along the riverbank, daring the city archers to waste arrows. Other times they simply drink, sing and dance around their fires, confident that time is on their side. You can't help but notice the discipline in the Norse ranks. While the Franks argue and panic, the Vikings work in near silence, each warrior slotting into place like a piece on a game board. When Ragnar gives an order, it's followed instantly. No complaints, no delays. Even the youngest boys in the camp seem to know their roles, carrying water, feeding the fires, sharpening knives. Not that the Franks are totally helpless. They have their own tricks, crossbowmen posted on rooftops, traps laid along the city's outer lanes, secret caches of boiling oil near the main gates. But the longer the standoff continues, the more everyone realizes Paris is not prepared for this kind of war. It's not just the soldiers who suffer. Ordinary people begin to hoard whatever food and coin they have left, locking doors and eyeing strangers with suspicion. Shops close early, and the usual bustle of the markets dies away. By the third night, Paris feels less like a city and more like a besieged fortress, each family huddled in their own patch of darkness. And all the while, Ragnar keeps up the pressure. His fleet is a floating city, rows of tents, piles of loot, women and children from earlier raids, blacksmiths repairing blades by firelight. The Vikings are in no hurry. They're used to waiting out their prey. Their patience is matched only by their appetite. Every few hours, a new ship returns from upriver with more stolen goods and grim-faced prisoners. You, clutching your battered cloak, stare out from the city walls at this teeming camp and try not to imagine what's coming next. At dawn, a horn blares from the Viking camp. You watch as Ragnar, resplendent in his wolf fur cloak, strides onto the riverbank surrounded by his fiercest warriors. The Norse line up, banging sword on shield in a slow, measured rhythm, a sound that vibrates in your chest like thunder. It's not just intimidation, it's theatre. Ragnar wants the Parisians to see the faces of those who have come for their gold, their city, and their pride. The message is clear, even if no words are exchanged. We're not going anywhere, not until you pay us or until we take what we want by force. Inside the city, the tension is unbearable. Children cry at night. The elderly huddle in churches, clutching relics and praying for a miracle. Some try to keep a sense of humor. One old baker jokes, "Maybe if we feed them enough bread, they'll just leave." You take stock of what you have. Some hard cheese, a broken dagger, and a deepening sense of dread. You can hear the creak of the city's wooden gates as guards reinforce them with anything they can find. Tables, benches, even an old saint's coffin pressed into service as a barricade. Outside, Ragnar watches. He's seen cities break before, seen kings beg for mercy. But Paris is different. It's not just a prize, it's a symbol. If he can humble this city, the world will remember his name. As darkness falls, you see a flash of light on the far side of the river, the torch of a Viking scout, signaling the start of something new. The siege is about to enter its next, more brutal phase, and you, trembling on the edge of history, have no choice but to wait and hope that dawn brings better news. It rarely does. The days blur together, each one thick with tension, sleepless nights, and the distant echo of axes against wood. By now, the Seine has become more than a river. It's a living, shifting battlefield, a highway for the ambitions of men like Ragnar Lodbrok. You learn to recognize the routine. Every morning the Vikings row out in clusters, their longships slicing through mist and sunlight, searching for new weaknesses in the countryside. Every evening, you watch them return, boats weighed down with plunder and prisoners, their laughter and songs drifting across the water like a taunt. It's the small communities along the riverbanks that suffer first and most. You might have family in one of those villages, a cousin in Poitou, a sister married to a farmer in Nanterre, maybe an old friend in Saint-Denis, but there's no time for visits and no chance to help. The Vikings hit fast and hard, slipping ashore with shields raised, faces streaked with mud or war paint, raiding every homestead that isn't abandoned in time. They know exactly what they're after: church silver, livestock, grain stores, anything portable and valuable. If resistance is fierce, they burn the place to the ground. If it's not, they laugh and drink from your wine jugs, then vanish back to their ships before Frankish soldiers can arrive. Word spreads by river, by foot, by terrified messenger. Sometimes the only warning you get is the smoke-thin black lines on the horizon, another farmstead going up in flames. Sometimes it's the stories that haunt you. A monk from Argenteuil, barefoot and half-mad, stumbling into Paris with tales of his monastery sacked and his brothers either killed or dragged away as slaves. There's a sickening sameness to each report, but the effect is cumulative. With every day, Paris shrinks inward, confidence eroding like sand beneath a tide. You might try to be brave, telling yourself the city's walls will hold, the king will send help, God will intervene. But the truth is, you're not sure of any of it. The king, Charles the Bold, is still gathering forces somewhere to the east, his messengers endlessly promising reinforcements that never seem to arrive. The city's own defenders are a hodgepodge: knights, citizen militias, a few foreign mercenaries, and more priests than anyone strictly needs in a siege. Nobody has enough weapons or food. The one thing you do have is fear, and plenty of it. Sometimes late at night you hear rumors that make you shiver. The Vikings have already bribed some of the local lords. There's a secret traitor in Paris sending messages by pigeon. Someone's poisoned the city wells. In this world of uncertainty, even the most outrageous gossip has power. People become jumpy, tempers flare, and petty theft becomes a serious crime, sometimes punished by a swift public hanging, just to make a point. Meanwhile, out on the river, Ragnar is orchestrating his own kind of order. He makes the rounds, checking in with his chiefs, ensuring the loot is divided fairly and discipline kept tight. There's no drunken chaos here, not for long. He has a reputation to maintain. If anyone gets out of line, the punishment is immediate. You see it one morning when a young Viking is caught trying to keep a gold cross for himself. Ragnar has him flogged in front of the whole fleet, then puts the cross on the prow of his own ship as a warning. Even among raiders, there are rules. You realize quickly that Ragnar's real genius isn't just his ferocity, it's his sense of timing. He keeps the pressure on, attacking just enough to keep the city off balance, but never committing all his forces at once. Sometimes he sends small groups to probe the city's bridges, testing the defenders' nerves, drawing fire without risking a real engagement. Other times, he holds back, letting fear do the work for him. It's a slow, choking strategy, and it's working. The riverbanks are littered with reminders of defeat. Abandoned carts, blackened beams from burned-out houses, the occasional floating barrel or, grimly, the body of someone who didn't escape in time. Crows gather, and the stench grows worse with every passing day. you start to wonder how much more the countryside can endure before there's nothing left to take. Inside Paris, the mood is equally grim. Each day brings another round of emergency meetings, more frantic prayers, and new faces at the makeshift infirmary, wounded from skirmishes on the bridges, or just half-starved refugees from the outer villages. The bishop holds processions, displaying holy relics in the hope of scaring the pagans off. Sometimes the crowd is moved to tears. More often it's just another excuse for a desperate crowd to gather and mutter in the shadow of the cathedral. You find yourself taking comfort in the smallest routines: the bell that tolls at sunset, the taste of stale bread, still warm from the communal oven, the sight of children playing in a cellar, too young to understand the danger. It's these ordinary moments, you realize, that make the siege bearable, if only for a heartbeat at a time. But then, just as you begin to hope for a lull, the Vikings strike again. This time it's a monastery on the far side of the river. The attack is sudden and brutal. The monks are dragged from their beds, the altar stripped of gold, ancient manuscripts tossed into the fire as the raiders bellow with laughter. You watch from the city wall as the flames light up the sky, the smoke rolling toward Paris like a warning. There's nothing you can do but watch. By now, even the most hardened defenders are starting to lose hope. Supplies run thin, tempers shorter still. The city's gates are shut tight, guarded day and night. Anyone caught trying to flee is turned back, or worse, thrown in jail for sowing panic. There are stories of a baker who tried to bribe his way out with a cart of loaves and a handful of coins, only to be hauled back to the city square and flogged for his trouble. And still, the Vikings press on. Each new raid brings more prisoners, more spoils, and more pressure on King Charles to act. Messages go back and forth by fast horse promises, threats, pleas for help. Sometimes you hear the king's envoys are intercepted, their letters burned, their bodies left by the roadside as a warning to anyone else thinking of sending for aid. If there's one consolation, it's that the Vikings are not invincible. There are small victories here and there, a bridge held for an extra day, a Viking raiding party ambushed and scattered, a storehouse saved from the torch by a handful of desperate townsfolk. Each success is celebrated, if only for a moment, with whispered prayers and nervous laughter, but they're just pebbles against a tide. Ragnar, for his part, seems unbothered. Some say he enjoys the game, that he thrives on the challenge. You spot him now and then, standing on the prow of his ship, arms folded, surveying the city with a cold, calculating gaze. Once, during a lull in the fighting, he even sends a message to the city, a formal demand for tribute, written in broken Latin and sealed with a scrap of wolf's fur. The price is outrageous: chests of gold, silver, livestock, and enough wine to keep his men happy for a year. It's more than Paris can pay, but that's the point. It's a taunt as much as a negotiation. King Charles, meanwhile, faces the same dilemma day after day. His advisors urge him to pay up, to buy time, to save the city at any cost. Others insist on fighting to the bitter end, warning that if you pay the Vikings once, they'll just come back for more. The arguments grow heated, voices raised in anger, sometimes even coming to blows. Charles listens, grim-faced, torn between pride and pragmatism. You, stuck in the middle, have no say in any of it. All you can do is wait, pray, and hope the next day brings some kind of resolution, good or bad. The city feels smaller by the day, the world outside reduced to rumor and fear. And yet, even in this darkest hour, life goes on. You wake each morning to the toll of the bell, share a crust of bread with your neighbors, and try to keep a little hope alive. Some nights you even manage to sleep, though your dreams are always of fire, water, and the terrible beating of oars in the mist. Somewhere, just beyond your reach, the fate of Paris hangs in the balance, and Ragnar Lodbrok, with his fleet of dragons, is determined to tip the scales in his favor. If you want to know what real dread tastes like, try living each day as a Parisian with Ragnar's fleet, sitting smugly on the river, their campfires taunting you from the far bank. Every time you climb the city walls and look out across the Seine, the view is the same. Norse banners fluttering above clusters of tents, columns of smoke rising from campfires, and the ominous silhouettes of longships moored with the calm assurance of men who know they are not in danger. The ordinary rhythms of city life are replaced by constant tension, Even the river itself, usually the city's lifeblood, is now a source of fear, its surface broken by Viking scouts, their eyes sharp for weakness. One morning you wake to the sound of shouting. News spreads quickly. A group of Norse warriors has landed upriver and burned another village before breakfast, sending a wave of terrified refugees stumbling to the city gates. You help haul open the great doors, letting in dozens of soot-streaked peasants, their faces hollow-eyed and their stories all the same. They took everything, or they left my father in the fields, or worst of all, they're coming this way. The air is heavy with smoke and the smell of fear. Inside the city, the population has swelled. Every spare room, every church nave, every cellar is crowded with the desperate and the displaced. Markets are shuttered, and food prices spike overnight. You watch as hungry children beg near the cathedral, their mothers clutching empty baskets. There's talk that the bishop has opened the crypts, sharing stores of salted fish and wine intended for the winter. It's a temporary mercy. Everyone knows those reserves won't last. It doesn't help that Paris itself is a city of contradictions, a maze of winding alleys, grand churches, and half-finished fortifications. The main island, Ile de la Cité, is both sanctuary and trap. You find yourself walking the bridges more than usual, checking the barricades, listening to the anxious gossip of soldiers and citizens. The bridges, solid, stone-spanned lifelines, are the city's pride and its weak spot. If the Vikings can take them, Paris will fall. Ragnar knows this too. You see him sometimes, striding along the far bank in his wolf pelt cloak, looking up at the defenders on the bridge. He makes no secret of his intentions. His warriors stage noisy drills within sight of the walls, letting the clang of axes and shields drift across the water. It's part intimidation, part preparation. You suspect he's waiting for the right moment to strike. Inside the city council chambers, tempers fray. King Charles's envoys arrive at last, bringing little more than advice and prayers. The king himself remains elsewhere, raising an army, or so the rumors claim. For the men and women of Paris, those are cold comfort. You see arguments break out in the open over food, over guard duty, over who deserves a place in the last best defended cellars if things go wrong. The city's leaders organize shifts to patrol the walls and bridges, but their confidence wavers. One afternoon, you find yourself on the bridge as a column of Vikings approaches, shields raised, spears gleaming. The alarm bell rings, and everyone races to the barricades. The Norse line up on the far side, shouting insults in broken Frankish, waving axes, and daring the defenders to cross. The city archers take their places, bows drawn, hands shaking. The standoff lasts for an eternity, neither side willing to risk the first blood. Eventually Ragnar gives a sharp whistle, and the Norse melt away into the trees, leaving only laughter behind. It's all a test, a reminder that they hold the initiative. Not all the pressure comes from outside. Inside the walls, Paris is unraveling. The priests preach endurance, the merchants hoard grain, and the poorer citizens start to whisper about surrender. You pass a group of soldiers arguing in the street, one swearing that he saw Viking scouts climbing the walls last night. Another claims the Vikings have a secret tunnel under the river. Nobody knows what to believe, but everyone agrees on one thing. If help doesn't arrive soon, it may not matter what's true. Night brings little relief. You sleep lightly, ears tuned to every distant cry or sudden silence. Occasionally you hear a splash, someone sneaking out to try their luck on the other bank, or a Norseman testing the city's resolve. Every now and then there's a skirmish in the dark. A sentry disappears, or a body washes up at dawn face down in the shallows. The fear is constant, never quite receded. One day, in the middle of this tension, word comes that Ragnar is offering a truce of sorts. He sends a delegation to the city gates, led by a grizzled old warrior with scars on his face and a smile like a knife. The message is clear: surrender the bridges, hand over a tribute of silver, and the fleet will leave Paris in peace. It's an offer designed to divide the city. Some, especially the wealthy merchants, urge acceptance. Others, the soldiers and priests, argue for defiance. The city council debates long into the night, voices echoing down the empty halls. You attend one of these meetings, standing at the back with a crowd of worried Parisians. The arguments go in circles. If we pay now, we'll only have to pay again next year. says one councillor. But if we fight, we may lose everything, replies another. The bishop, weary and pale, reminds everyone that Paris has faced disasters before, fires, floods, plagues, and survived. But even he looks unconvinced. While the city hesitates, Ragnar acts. One cold morning, his warriors gather at the riverbank, a silent army of shadows. At a signal, they launch a sudden, furious assault on the bridge. The defenders scramble to respond. Arrows fill the air, axes crash against wood, and for a moment, it seems the Vikings might break through, but Paris holds, just barely. The Norse fall back, leaving behind a handful of dead and a warning painted in blood. Next time we take it all. The victory is bittersweet. The defenders cheer, but the cost is obvious. Half a dozen men lost, more wounded, and the barricades badly damaged. You spend the rest of the day helping to patch the bridge, stacking whatever you can find to fill the gaps. Doors, barrels, even old statues dragged from the cathedral. The work is frantic and desperate. Meanwhile, the Vikings step up their campaign. They raid at night, torching outlying farms, ambushing supply wagons, capturing anyone unlucky enough to stray outside the walls. The river runs red at dawn, and the stench of burning grain fills the air. Paris is being choked, starved, isolated, and slowly worn down. Yet, for every setback, the city finds some reason to carry on. You see it in the faces of the defenders, grim and stubborn, refusing to give up. The baker still bakes, the priest still preaches, and the children still play, even as the world collapses around them. Occasionally, you hear laughter, a joke shared over a cup of watery wine, a song sung softly in a candlelit room. It's not much, but it's enough to keep hope alive. Someone paints a crude drawing of Ragnar on a wall, giving him donkey ears and a pig's snout. Even in crisis, Parisians find a way to mock their enemies. Yet, everyone knows that unless something changes, the siege can't last much longer. The city's fate now hinges on two things: the strength of its defenses and the will of its people. Both are wearing thin. You look up at the sky, searching for some sign, a flock of birds, a new cloud on the horizon, anything to break the deadlock. But all you see is the same old river, choked with ships and shadowed by the threat of the Vikings. Paris endures, but for how much longer, no one can say. If you want to know the feeling of a city running on nerves and prayer, you only have to walk Paris's bridges at dawn. The stone is slick with dew, the mist curling off the river thick enough to swallow your footsteps. You can smell smoke from last night's campfires drifting from the north side, mixed with the scent of roasting meat and ick. And if you're honest, the faint tang of fear from your own side of the barricades. Every guard is jumpy, every shadow suspicious. You greet your neighbours in whispers, voice hoarse from a night spent listening for shouts, horns, or the scrape of a grappling hook against wet stone. You try not to think about the villagers who tried to slip through the Viking lines under cover of darkness. Some never came back, and you try not to notice the empty spaces along the walls where familiar faces once stood, now replaced by raw recruits, their hands shaking on spears that look far too heavy for them. Even the city's stray dogs seem uneasy, slinking through alleys as if they too know something terrible is coming. Each morning brings its own set of rumours. The king's army is just days away, the Vikings have run out of food and will soon leave. A miracle relic has been found that will turn the tide. You've heard it all before. Most people just nod and carry on, saving their real energy for the work of staying alive. Food is now a daily battle. You line up in narrow lanes for your ration of barley bread or bean stew. Thinner every week, the city's granaries shrinking by the day. There's talk of stretching the grain with sawdust or acorns, a trick as old as famine itself. Some mothers weep quietly, scraping the last crumbs into a child's hand, hiding their own hunger behind a brave smile. At the convent, the nuns open the doors to anyone with an empty bowl, offering what little they have. No one complains. What's the use? The city council is in crisis mode. The bishop calls an emergency prayer procession through the streets, relics on display, hoping to remind everyone that Paris is still under divine protection. You join the throng, chanting with hoarse conviction as incense curls in the air. It feels good for a moment, to be part of something bigger, to believe that maybe, just maybe, The saints are listening. But as soon as the prayers fade, you hear a different sound. A child coughing in the cold, the distant clang of a Norse axe, the creak of a siege engine being dragged into place. You can sense the tension ratcheting up. The Vikings are probing again, testing for weak spots, launching sudden feints at the southern wall, or firing burning arrows into the outskirts. One night, a group of Norsemen tries to cross the river under cover of fog. They're spotted by a sharp-eyed guard and driven back, but not before setting fire to a granary. You watch the flames eat through the roof, and your heart sinks. That grain was meant for winter, or with luck for a victory feast. Now it's nothing but ash. Ragnar's presence looms over everything. Even if you never see him close up, his legend grows with each passing day. The city's storytellers can't help themselves. They whisper that he is descended from Odin, that he can turn invisible, that he's already conquered kingdoms from Russia to Ireland. Some claim he eats only raw meat, or bathes in the blood of his enemies. You doubt that last part, but after a month of siege, nothing seems impossible. Jokes about Ragnar slip into street conversation, never too loudly, always with a nervous glance at the river. You find yourself making one or two just to show you're not afraid, even if your insides are knotted tight as a ship's rope. One afternoon, you're pressed into service repairing the barricades on the bridge. The work is endless, hauling timbers, stacking stones, filling gaps with whatever can be found. The men beside you curse the splinters and cracked nails, the endless mud, the blisters on their hands. But they keep working, because what else can they do? The city's survival hangs on these makeshift defences, and nobody wants to be the one who let the Vikings through. During a brief pause, you look out over the water. The Norse camp is busy, smiths hammering at broken weapons, cooks stirring iron cauldrons, warriors sparring in the dirt. Children play near the ships, oblivious to the tension in the air. It's strange, almost domestic, if you forget for a second the purpose behind it all. These aren't mindless barbarians, they're families, craftsmen, merchants, fighters. They've built a society on the move, one that can pack up and vanish as quickly as it appeared. But you don't have the luxury of forgetting. At sunset, a Norse delegation approaches the city gates. They're unarmed, carrying only a white cloth and a battered chest. The leader, a bearded giant with gold rings in his beard, calls out in broken Frankish, offering another chance for peace. "Give us silver," he shouts, "and we go." His voice echoes across the square, bouncing off shuttered windows and silent crowds. The city council gathers in the cathedral, their faces grim. The bishop argues for holding firm. "If we pay, we only invite more raids." The merchants, fearing for their fortunes, urge negotiation. The soldiers want to fight, though most know the odds are against them. You stand at the back, listening, heart pounding, as the debate grows louder. In the end, the council sends a message of refusal. Paris will not be bought. We will defend our city. The answer is swift. That night, Ragnar orders a fresh assault on the southern bridge. This time, the attack is vicious. Waves of Vikings charging through the mist, axes flashing, shields raised. The defenders fight desperately, hurling stones, pouring boiling oil, shooting arrows until their fingers bleed. For hours, the outcome hangs in the balance. The bridge shudders under the weight of battle. At last, the Norse fall back, leaving a tangle of bodies behind. It's a costly victory. Dozens of Parisians lie dead, and the barricades are nearly destroyed. You help drag the wounded from the rubble, your arms aching, your face streaked with blood and sweat. A priest moves among the fallen, offering last rites. Somewhere in the chaos, a mother weeps over her son's broken body. You turn away, swallowing hard. There's no time for mourning. The city must hold. The next day, the mood is grim. No one celebrates. Supplies are running low, tempers even lower. You hear whispers that some are thinking of fleeing by boat or bribing the guards to open a gate at night. The bishop thunders from the pulpit that anyone caught collaborating with the enemy will face the severest punishment. But you know fear can make people desperate. Ragnar, meanwhile, shifts tactics. He orders raids on the last remaining gardens and orchards outside the city walls, torching whatever he can't carry away. The countryside is a wasteland, blackened fields, ruined cottages, Empty roads, a line of refugees, snakes toward Paris, but the gates remain closed. The city is out of room and out of pity. You see them camped along the banks, ragged and hungry, staring up at the walls that used to promise safety. At night, a new worry takes hold. Plague. Rumors spread of sickness among the Vikings, fevers, coughs, a strange rash on the skin. Some say it's a sign of God's displeasure. Others think it's just the price of too many men crowded together with too little to eat. Either way, the Norse seem unsettled. Their singing is quieter, their campfires fewer. Some ships float empty, bobbing in the current, abandoned by crews who have succumbed to disease. You hope the plague will end the siege. Some even pray for it. But deep down, you know the city's luck can't last forever. Something has to give. Every day you wake up, lace your boots and do what needs to be done. Patching walls, carrying water, sharing what little you have. You remind yourself that Paris has stood for centuries, survived war, famine and flood. Maybe, just maybe, it will survive Ragnar Lodbrok too. As the sun sets, you stand on the bridge one more time, staring out at the flickering Norse fires, and you whisper a silent promise. I will hold on. I will see this through. And so, for another day, Paris endures. Day after day, Paris clings to its stubborn heartbeat, refusing to fall. Every morning the bells ring out. Sometimes in hope, sometimes in warning, always a reminder that the city's spirit is bruised but not broken. As the siege stretches into weeks, you find yourself moving almost on instinct, following the patterns of survival, gather food, tend the wounded, repair the barricades, watch the river for the first signs of another Viking assault. Sleep is brief and restless, the air inside the city thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, damp stone and a fear that never quite dissipates. One evening, as you drag yourself back from guard duty, you notice something new, a hush along the parapets, a ripple of nervous excitement. Word spreads quickly. King Charles the Bold has finally arrived on the outskirts of Paris with a small contingent of Frankish warriors. You catch a glimpse of his banners through a chink in the city wall, the blue field and gold fleurs-de-lis of the royal house. Hope flares for a moment, then dims when you realize how few soldiers he's brought. Still, for the first time in weeks, someone besides a priest or councilman is giving orders. Charles is here in person, and he's furious. The king is no stranger to Viking raids. He's faced them before, with mixed success, but never on this scale. The story goes that Charles once tried to pay off another Norse warlord, only to watch him return the next year, bolder than ever. This time he vows there will be no ransom. Paris is too important. It cannot be seen to bend. He rides through the city on a white horse, armor polished, beard neatly trimmed, flanked by stern-faced nobles. The people line the streets, hopeful but wary. You see the king's gaze, hard, calculating. He stops to speak with the bishop, inspects the bridge fortifications, questions weary soldiers. You even spot him exchanging a few words with a group of peasants, promising protection, swearing vengeance on the Norse. Paris will hold, he insists. I will see to it myself. That night, there is a council in the cathedral. Charles the bishop, the leading merchants, the commanders of the city watch, all gather around a table littered with maps, letters and half-eaten loaves of bread. You're not important enough to be inside, but you listen through a cracked window as voices rise and fall. The arguments are fierce. Some urge negotiation, others demand a final stand. The king paces, hands clenched, weighing each word. At last he decides no tribute. Not yet. The city will fight. The next morning, the order is given. Everyone who can carry a weapon is summoned to the walls. You take your place among the defenders, heart hammering, as the Viking horns sound from across the river. The air is electric. The sun rises blood red over the Seine, illuminating the enemy lines as they form up for battle. This time, Ragnar means business. The Norse come on in waves, shields locked, axes gleaming, their war cries drowning out the church bells. They charge the bridge, scaling ladders, hacking at the barricades. Arrows fly, stones rain down, boiling water splashes from the ramparts. The noise is deafening, confusion of shouts, screams, the clang of steel on wood. You fight back with everything you have, alongside men and women you barely know, each determined to keep the enemy from crossing. For hours, the battle surges back and forth. The Vikings are fierce, relentless, but the defenders are desperate. You see friends fall, wounded dragged back from the front lines, priests tending to the dying amid the chaos. At one point, a section of the barricade gives way, and Norse warriors spill onto the bridge. For a moment, it looks like all is lost, but the Parisians rally, driving the attackers back with a wild, stubborn fury. By midday, the Vikings retreat to their camp, leaving the bridge littered with bodies and broken weapons. The price has been high, dozens dead, many more wounded, but the city still stands. Charles rides the length of the walls, congratulating the survivors, promising rewards for bravery. The mood is tense, exhausted, but almost triumphant. Yet as night falls, you know the victory is fragile. The Vikings have not left. Their campfires burn as brightly as ever. Supplies are dangerously low, and now disease begins to creep through both camps. Fevers, coughs, open wounds festering in the heat and filth of the siege. The dead are buried in mass graves, the stench hanging over the city like a shroud. You try to sleep, but your dreams are filled with fire and blood. Every sound, every groan of the wind, every distant shout makes you flinch awake, certain the attack has begun again. Still, Paris endures. So do you. In the days that follow, the standoff continues. Charles sends out scouts and messengers, hoping for reinforcements from other Frankish lords. He tries to organize sorties against the Viking camp, but every attempt is met with fierce resistance. The Norse are too well entrenched, their defense is too strong. Each day brings new skirmishes, more losses, and little sign of relief. Inside the city, tempers fray. Fistfights break out in breadlines. The sick are isolated in makeshift infirmaries, watched over by exhausted monks. You spend your hours tending wounds, burying the dead, comforting neighbors as best you can. The city's pulse is weak but stubborn, each heartbeat a small act of rebellion against despair. Then a new disaster strikes. The plague that began among the Vikings now spreads inside the walls. It starts with a handful of cases, a fever here, a rash there, but quickly grows. The infirmary fills to bursting. The bishop orders processions of prayer and penance, hoping to placate an angry god. Some say the plague is a miracle, a weapon sent by heaven to defeat the Norse. Others, more cynical, simply hide in their homes and pray they are overlooked. The Vikings are suffering too. From the walls you can see their numbers thinning. Fires burn lower, songs die away. Sometimes bodies are set afloat on makeshift rafts, drifting down the Seine as a grisly warning to both sides. Even Ragnar seems affected. His appearances are less frequent. His orders barked instead of shouted with his usual bravado. Still, the siege drags on. Charles faces a terrible choice: keep fighting, risking the destruction of Paris by famine and plague, or open negotiations with the Norse. The council is divided. Some want to fight to the end. Others whisper about sending a delegation to Ragnar's camp. You find yourself hoping for anything, an end. One way or another, the city feels like a graveyard, hope and fear in equal measure. One evening, as the sun sets over the battered walls, you walk the parapets, watching the river. The sun glimmers in the fading light, indifferent to the suffering on its banks. You realize, with a sudden painful clarity, that the city has reached its breaking point. But so have the Vikings. Soon, something must give. You can almost feel it in the air, that strange brittle tension, like a bowstring stretched to the breaking point. Paris and the Vikings have been locked in this standoff for weeks now, both sides exhausted, battered, and on the verge of collapse. It's as if the city and the enemy outside are mirrors of each other, each weakened by hunger, each haunted by sickness, each clinging to the faint hope that the other side will be the first to blink. Inside the walls, the atmosphere is raw and ragged. You move through narrow streets, past shuttered windows and makeshift shrines, past children whose games now involve pretending to fight off raiders with sticks. The daily bread is nearly gone. The water, drawn from ever-shrinking wells, is murky and tastes faintly of river mud. Fewer people come to the church, many are simply too weak to leave their homes. Some have begun to bury their valuables in floorboards, convinced the city will fall at any moment. Others, the truly desperate, whisper of opening the gates themselves. Better a living slave than a starving corpse. Even the leaders are showing cracks. The bishop, once so fiery in his sermons, stands pale and silent at council meetings, his prayers quiet and strained. King Charles the Bold, for all his stern words, is spending more time in his tent, arguing with advisors behind closed doors, snapping at messengers who bring only bad news. At times you catch glimpses of him alone at the cathedral's altar, his crown in his lap, head bowed as if the weight of Paris itself is pressing down on his shoulders. But the pressure isn't only on the Franks. Across the river, the Norse camp is shrinking. The plague that crept in a week ago is now full-blown. You see fewer and fewer Vikings on the riverbank, and the once loud songs at their fires are now just murmurs in the night. Sometimes you spot bodies carried out from the tents and sent downriver on rafts, the current bearing them away. The Norse are just as hungry as the Parisians now. Their own supplies are dwindling, and every day, fewer warriors show up for the war councils around Ragnar's great tent. Ragnar himself has changed. Where before he strode the camps with a swagger and a wolfish grin, now he moves with a limp, his voice hoarse, his eyes shadowed. Some say he's caught the fever too. Others whisper that the gods are punishing him for attacking a city so close to the heart of Christendom. Still, he refuses to give up. If anything, his reputation for ruthlessness grows. Each morning he makes a show of executing a handful of Frankish prisoners in view of the city walls, daring the defenders to come out and fight, or simply to terrify them into surrender. That spectacle leaves a scar. You see the crowds gather, faces hard and set, children hidden behind mothers' skirts as the Vikings drag out their victims. No one speaks, no one protests. It's a grim reminder that mercy is a rare commodity during siege. But the truth is, both sides are running out of options. Paris can't hold much longer. The Norse can't keep up the pressure either. The question is, who will give in first? On a grey, drizzling morning, an emissary arrives from Ragnar's camp, this time under a flag of truce. He's a rangy, bearded man with tired eyes and a battered shield, accompanied by a few guards who look more sick than menacing. He carries a new message, handed directly to Charles and the city council. The demand is simple: a massive ransom, 26,000 pounds of silver and gold, plus food and wine. In return, the Vikings promise to leave Paris intact and not return. The city is to be held hostage until the tribute is paid. The demand is met with outrage inside the council chamber. Some call it blackmail. Others, exhausted and starving, argue it's the only way out. Charles himself is torn. He knows that paying the Vikings will make him look weak, but to refuse may mean the total destruction of Paris. The debate rages for hours, spilling over into the streets as word gets out. Crowds gather outside the cathedral, hungry for news, for hope, for anything that isn't just another story of death and defeat. That night, Paris is quieter than ever. You walk the walls under a thin sliver of moon, the river black and silent beneath you. Every sound feels magnified. The creak of timbers, the rustle of rats in the alleys, the far-off cough of a sick child. You find yourself hoping desperately for something, an answer, a miracle, a surrender that doesn't feel like shame. The next morning, the council reconvenes. The decision, when it comes, is almost anticlimactic. Charles, grey-faced and hollow-eyed, stands before the assembled leaders and the bishop. "We will pay," he says, the words heavy as iron, "for Paris, for her people, for the hope that we may rebuild." There are tears and curses, prayers and sighs of relief. The treasury is emptied, the cathedral stripped of its last gold and silver. Merchants are persuaded to hand over their hidden reserves. Every scrap of precious metal is melted down, counted, and sent in guarded carts to the city gates. You watch as the Norse collect their prize, grinning with the kind of relief only the desperate know. Ragnar himself appears at the front of the column, wrapped in furs, gaunt but still standing. He inspects the treasure with a shrewd eye, then signals his thanks with a curt nod. The siege, it seems, is over. But even as the city breathes a shaky sigh of relief, you know the real price is yet to be counted. Paris is broken, her people starved and scarred, her pride humbled before the world. The Norse load their ships with treasure, their numbers thinned by sickness and battle, but spirits lifted by the promise of home and reward. They withdraw from the city's walls, their fleet slowly moving down the Seine, the threat finally, if temporarily, removed. The city's bells ring out again, this time for survival rather than victory. The markets open, the churches fill with prayers of thanksgiving, and life, however bruised, begins to move forward. But the lesson is clear to everyone. Viking gold comes at the highest cost, and the memory of this siege will not fade soon. You, standing among the battered defenders, know it's not just about who won or lost, it's about who endured, who bore witness, and who managed, against all odds, to keep hope alive. And for now, in the uneasy silence after the storm, Paris endures. You would think that after the tribute is paid and the last Viking ship disappears down the Seine, Paris would immediately spring back to life. But that's not how it happens. Not in a city that's just stared famine, plague, and slaughter in the face. What follows instead is a strange, hollow calm. You and everyone around you walk the battered streets in a daze, unable to believe it's over. The Vikings are gone, yes, but so much else is gone with them. Food, hope, loved ones, and maybe most of all, a sense of safety that will never return. The first days after the withdrawal are oddly silent. No more war horns at dawn, no shouts from the river, no sound but the cawing of crows, picking at the ruins of burned-out houses and broken carts along the embankments. The bells ring again, but now their notes seem tired, echoing through half-empty streets. At first, everyone moves slowly, as if afraid the Norse will come charging back for something they left behind. There are small, scattered celebrations, a mug of weak wine raised in relief, a brief dance in the square, but they're muted, haunted by the memory of what's just happened. The bishop calls for a mass of thanksgiving, and the whole city crowds the cathedral, desperate to hear words of hope. The air is thick with incense, tears, and the soft murmur of prayers for the dead. You find yourself wedged between strangers, feeling both alone and strangely connected to every trembling hand and bowed head around you. Charles the Bold remains in the city for a few days, doing his best to look kingly. He rides through the streets promising to help rebuild, swearing vengeance on any Norseman who dares return. He organizes the repair of bridges and walls, orders food brought in from the countryside, and tries to restore a sense of order. But even a king can't conjure bread from thin air or heal wounds with promises. There's simply too much to fix, too many losses to count. For weeks, Paris is a city of funerals. The dead from the siege are buried in mass graves just outside the walls, their names whispered or, in too many cases, already forgotten. Each day you see long, grim processions, priests in muddy robes, families carrying wooden crosses, children trailing behind with empty eyes. The smell of incense barely covers the scent of death that lingers everywhere. In the poorer quarters, the survivors begin to sweep out the debris, patch holes in the roofs, and salvage whatever can be reused from the ruins. Nothing is wasted now. Food remains desperately scarce. Even with the Norse gone, there are too many mouths and not enough grain. Rations continue, and the mood in the bread lines is tense. The bakers do what they can, but until new shipments arrive or crops recover, every meal is a victory in itself. You learn to be grateful for hard cheese and stale crusts. In the markets, barter becomes the rule. Anything of value traded for a handful of beans or a few onions. You see silversmiths melting down what's left of church plate to make spoons or cups. The very gold that once dazzled on the altar now reduced to practical scraps for daily survival. Yet, even as the city suffers, something stubborn and miraculous starts to grow back. The children are the first to recover, finding games to play in the ashes, turning old shields into sleds and fallen timbers into makeshift swords. Soon laughter creeps into the courtyards again, and you catch yourself smiling at small silly things. A kitten curled in the sun, a street performer juggling empty wine bottles for a coin or two, the first green shoots pushing up between broken stones where fire once raged. Paris is not dead, far from it. The city leaders meet again and again, arguing over how to rebuild. There are calls to strengthen the bridges, raise new towers, train more soldiers. The bishop urges forgiveness, but not everyone is ready to let go of their anger. Some whisper about revenge, others, scarred by what they've seen, vow to never trust a foreigner again. It's a dangerous moment. Wounds are still raw, and old quarrels threaten to turn neighbour against neighbour. But Charles, to his credit, makes a show of unity. He appoints a new council, promises grain from royal granaries, and even pardons a handful of those caught trying to desert during the siege. His message is clear. Paris survived because its people held together, and now they must do so again. You find yourself agreeing, even if part of you still blames the king for not acting sooner. As spring turns to summer, the city's rhythm returns. The markets reopen, and merchants venture out to neighbouring towns, eager to buy what little surplus remains. Fishermen test the Seine for the first time in months, and you watch their boats drift through the morning mist, hoping for a catch big enough to feed an entire street. The sound of hammers rings out as carpenters repair battered walls and masons lay new stones atop the old. Each blow a statement. We're still here. And through it all, the memory of the Vikings lingers. Every rumour of a ship on the horizon makes people nervous. The scars on the bridges, the burned fields outside the walls, these are reminders that the Norse are never truly gone. Some nights you wake from dreams of shouting, fire, and the crash of axes, heart pounding, only to find the city peaceful and still. You realise something though. Paris will never be the same city it was before the siege. And maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. The survivors, hardened by hunger and fear, are more resourceful now, less trusting but also less naive. You see it in the way they move, cautious, wary, but unwilling to let hope die. Bit by bit, street by street, Paris remakes itself. It's slow work. You pitch in where you can, helping to clear debris, mending a neighbour's roof, offering a word of comfort at a funeral, or a joke to lighten a long day. In time, you notice the city's pulse returning, stronger for having nearly been stilled. As the summer deepens, a strange kind of pride blossoms. You survived the great Viking siege. You withstood famine and fear. And even as the next harvest is sown and the bells ring out for new weddings, you remember that nothing is promised. Not peace, not plenty, not even another morning. But for now, Paris stands, scarred and changed, but beautifully, undeniably alive. As the summer months settle over Paris, life creeps forward, but the memory of the siege lingers in every shadow and echo. Each street tells its own story, scorched timbers still jutting from once grand townhouses, soot on church stones, and in the poorer quarters, the battered remains of barricades left standing as grim trophies. You walk these streets every day, helping where you can, and with every step, you feel the city trying to knit itself back together. It's slow, exhausting work. Even simple tasks, hauling fresh water, sharing bread, patching a neighbour's roof, feel heavier now, as if the very stones of Paris remember the weight of siege. The wounds are both seen and unseen. Some families mourn missing loved ones with a stoic silence, keeping their grief private behind closed doors. Others are openly angry, venting their pain in arguments at the market or tearful prayers in the cathedral. The city is filled with empty places, benches where elders once sat to gossip, workshops silent because the craftsmen are gone, alleys where children once played. Every Parisian knows someone who didn't survive. The loss touches everyone, from the richest merchant to the poorest beggar. But as the weeks turn into months, the routines of daily life offer their own kind of healing. The baker, who lost half his flour in the fires, manages to coax a few loaves from his battered oven, handing them out for almost nothing. The old stonemason, who fought on the bridge with a rusted sword, now rebuilds that same span, stone by patient stone. You help lift heavy timbers, feeling the ache in your arms and the warmth in your chest, a quiet pride at simply being alive and useful. Rebuilding Paris is a communal effort. Churches open their doors to orphans, and guilds take in apprentices who lost their families. Soldiers, once heroes, now exhausted survivors, patrol the streets less for fear of invaders and more to keep the peace among their own. The bishop organizes a massive procession on the feast of Seine, urging the city to thank God for deliverance and to pray for those lost. You join the candlelit march, weaving through streets lined with silent faces, the flickering lights a small comfort against the darkness of memory. Charles the Bold, The king who paid the Danegeld faces a city divided in opinion. Some praise his willingness to buy Paris's survival, arguing that a living city is better than a destroyed one. Others grumble that paying the Vikings was an act of weakness, inviting future raids. There are angry meetings in the council chamber, rumours of blame cast at absent lords, and quiet talk of replacing Charles with a stronger king. For now, though, the city's need to survive outweighs its desire for vengeance. Most people are simply too tired to care about politics. They have crops to replant, wounds to heal, families to protect. One of the first visible signs of real recovery is the reopening of the markets. You walk down to the square one sunny morning and find a dozen stalls, meagre but growing every day. Fish from the Seine, beans from the outlying farms, a few carrots and onions, even the odd honeycomb or hunk of cheese. Merchants from nearby towns venture in, trading what little surplus they have. Prices are high, but after months of siege, any abundance feels miraculous. You see laughter at last, a child sneaking a plum, a juggler tossing 3 battered apples, a farmer bartering eggs for salt with a grin. There are setbacks. The city is not truly safe. Bands of outlaws drawn by the chaos prowl the roads at night. Some survivors turn to thievery, unable to feed their families any other way. Once, you hear the bell ring in alarm and see a thief chased through the alleys by a mob, only to be caught and dealt with harshly. The justice is swift and rough, but there is no other way. Paris cannot afford to let disorder take root. Rumours of new Viking raids haunt every conversation. Any sail on the horizon, any stranger in the market, is met with suspicion. You help fortify the bridges, add spikes to the city gates, and teach the younger children how to hide, if there's ever a next time. The city's leaders train more militia, organise watches, and demand news from the countryside. Paris will not be caught unprepared again. Yet, beneath the caution, a stubborn confidence returns. People start to talk about the future, not just the past. Marriages are arranged, children are baptized, and young couples who met during the siege wed in the rebuilt cathedral. Each wedding is both a celebration and a statement. Life continues, even after the worst. You visit the rebuilt monastery at Saint-Denis one bright afternoon, walking through the new cloisters with the other volunteers. The monks who survived by the mercy of their neighbours now tend vegetable gardens in the shadow of the old stone walls, sharing food with anyone in need. The library is being restored, with precious books and manuscripts rescued from the ashes, copied laboriously by hand. It's a small act of defiance, proof that faith and knowledge can endure even in the wake of violence. One day, a caravan of travellers arrives from the south, bringing fresh news. The Norse fleet, loaded with gold and silver, has returned to its homeland. Some say Ragnar himself fell ill and died on the voyage. Others insist he returned triumphant, a hero among his people. There are stories of wild celebrations in the north, great feasts, songs of Paris's fall, and the forging of new weapons with Frankish silver. You realize that for the Vikings, this was not just a raid, but a legend in the making. And so for Paris too, a legend is born. Children invent games of Vikings and Parisians, chasing each other around the squares with sticks for swords. Poets begin to sing of the city's endurance, and old men tell younger generations how they held the bridges against impossible odds. The scars of siege become marks of honor, reminders that even when all seemed lost, the city endured. The last thing you do each night is listen to the quiet. No horns, no screams, just the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of wind through narrow streets, and sometimes a scrap of song from a window overhead. Paris breathes again, changed forever, but still alive. In the morning you wake to the sound of hammers and bells. You step out into a city that, scarred, battered and proud, is still yours. By the time autumn paints the chestnut trees with gold, Paris has become a city of survivors. Every face you pass on the street is marked by the ordeal, hollow cheeks, a new line at the brow, but also a look of grim determination that wasn't there before. The scars of the siege linger everywhere, in the patched-up bridges, the half-rebuilt houses, the craters in the streets where fires once raged. But these marks are also proof that, even when held hostage, Paris would not give up. In those first cool weeks, the rebuilding feels endless. Some days you help a neighbor re-thatch a roof. Other days you join a team clearing the ruined warehouses by the docks. The city seems to run on favors now. If you have bread, you share it. If you have a strong back, you haul stones for the cathedral or the market square. Everyone knows that for all the king's proclamations, the real work of restoration falls to ordinary hands. Hands like yours, still blistered, but stronger than you ever thought possible. The hardest task is restoring trust. Even as the city reopens, there's a nervousness in every crowd. You see it in the way people glance over their shoulders at a stranger or flinch when they hear a shout from the riverbank. Sometimes it feels like everyone is just waiting for another disaster. But there's a flip side to that fear, a cautious solidarity, the sense that if the worst comes again, you'll face it together. The shared ordeal has drawn neighbors closer, if only for now. One chilly morning, you find yourself standing on the repaired southern bridge, looking out at the river that nearly doomed the city. The Seine looks so peaceful now, its surface broken only by the wake of a fisherman's skiff or the flash of a heron in flight. But you can still see the ghosts of that spring, the lines of Viking ships, the clash of steel, and the smoke that turned day to night. Sometimes you half expect to see Ragnar Lodbrok himself, standing at the prow of a phantom longship, eyes searching for weakness. Old habits die hard. The rumors of new raids never quite disappear. Merchants arriving from the north bring tales of Norse warbands gathering along the coasts, sometimes even new fleets sighted at the river's mouth. Every so often the bells ring in alarm, and the city rushes to the walls, only to find a wayward trading vessel or a raft of monks fleeing trouble upriver. The city's new militia drills every week, bows strung, swords sharpened, old and young alike, learning to stand firm. You even teach your younger cousin how to fire a crossbow, joking that he'll need it if the Norse ever come calling again. The laughter is thin, but it's better than fear. King Charles the Bold makes a show of strength. He returns to Paris frequently, his retinue swelling with soldiers and clerks. He supervises the rebuilding of fortifications and personally inspects the garrisons at every gate. There are new taxes to pay for the repairs and grumbling to match, but the king is determined that Paris will never again be so vulnerable. He orders the construction of new towers, insists on stockpiling grain, and funds the training of more professional soldiers. The message is clear: never again will a Viking fleet hold Paris hostage. For a while, the king's efforts bring a measure of confidence back. The streets are safer, the bridges fortified, the markets noisy with life. You see Parisians starting to believe in their city's future once more, even as the shadows of the past linger at the edge of every conversation. The children play games in the squares, sometimes still Vikings and Parisians, but just as often the King's Watch or bridge defenders. The scars on the city's walls become stories passed from one generation to the next. As the harvest comes in, there's a cautious optimism. The fields outside the walls are green again, new crops replacing the blackened stubble left by fire. The first loads of barley and beans are hauled into the city, greeted with cheers and sometimes tears. You help with the threshing and the storing, the air rich with the scent of grain and earth. For the first time in months, the markets have more than a few turnips or dried beans on offer. There are apples, onions, even a handful of eggs. The baker's oven glows bright, and the first loaves of fresh bread vanish before they cool. Yet, even with food in the larder and walls rebuilt, some wounds refuse to close. At every funeral, there are too many mourners. At every wedding, at least one empty chair for the father, brother, or friend lost in the siege. The memory of paying the Danigeld, giving gold for survival, hangs heavy in the city's heart. Some whisper it was cowardice. Others insist it was the only way. You realize that Paris has learned a bitter lesson. Survival sometimes demands a price, and the world is not always kind to those who stand alone. Still, hope endures. On Sunday mornings, the cathedral is packed, some for prayer, others for the comfort of company. The bishop's voice is steadier now, preaching unity and resilience. You attend one mass where he blesses the city's rebuilt gates, sprinkling holy water as the bells ring. The moment feels significant, an act of defiance against fear, a statement that Paris will not bow again. With the arrival of winter, you brace for hardship but find that the city, though battered, is prepared. The granaries are better stocked, the streets are policed, the sick cared for in the new infirmary, and fires burn in every hearth. You visit neighbours with gifts of bread or salted fish, joining in small gatherings to share stories of the siege. There is a need to speak of what happened, to make sense of it all, to laugh sometimes at the absurdity of Viking fashions or the king's awkward attempts at rousing speeches. Even the worst memories are softened a little by time and togetherness. Every so often, a stranger arrives, a merchant from Italy, a scholar from the south, a wandering bard. They all want to hear about the siege, the great ransom, the way the city survived against all odds. You listen as others tell the tale, embellishing or downplaying their own roles, turning tragedy into legend, and you realize that Paris's ordeal has become more than history. It's become a story for the world. The first snow falls quietly, blanketing the city in white. You stand on the bridge one morning, watching the flakes settle on the repaired stones, and feel a cautious peace. Life is still hard, but it is life. The Seine flows, the bells ring, and Paris, forever changed, endures. The snows of winter cover Paris like a fresh parchment, gentle at first, then heavy, pressing the world into silence. You spend those first cold weeks gathering wood, patching leaks in the roof, sharing what warmth you can with neighbours. Inside your home, you count your blessings, modest rations, an old blanket, the company of those who survived. Each meal feels precious, every cup of hot broth a small victory over hardship. You join others in the market, bundled in cloaks, faces red from the cold, trading stories as you haggle over a few onions or a string of dried fish. The markets are lively again, and though the goods are humble, you feel a flicker of gratitude that you're not lining up for a ration of watery soup as you did during those desperate weeks. Every day, the city grows stronger. Masons work even in the frost, repairing what's left of the broken walls. At the river, carpenters fix battered docks and fishermen break the ice for their nets, sometimes pulling up more memories than fish. A lost helmet, a charred plank, a bone-white shield. Children build snow forts in the shadow of real barricades, their laughter echoing through alleyways. You see hope everywhere, disguised as ordinary routine. A baker who whistles while kneading dough, an old woman sweeping her steps, a merchant telling a joke loud enough for the whole street to hear. Yet, beneath the calm, the city's wounds are still raw. There are nights when you wake from dreams of battle, your heart racing as if the horns had sounded again. Some families keep candles burning all night, just in case. Others whisper prayers at bedtime, asking for protection against enemies seen and unseen. The scars of the siege are invisible and visible. A limp in a neighbour's walk, a missing hand, a haunted look that won't quite fade. Winter is always a season for remembering, and you notice it especially this year. The bishop leads evening services by candlelight, the great cathedral filled with flickering shadows and the murmur of prayers. He speaks often of resilience, but also of humility. We were humbled, but not destroyed. Let us never forget, but also let us forgive. His words settle over the city like a soft snow, inviting forgiveness of enemies, of neighbours, of the king, even of oneself. But you also talk about what comes next. We must be ready, the city elders say. The Norse may return, or some other threat may rise. Plans are made for more regular militia training, for stockpiling extra food, for building watchtowers along the Seine. Some suggest reaching out to distant allies, Burgundy, Aquitaine, even Rome, for support, trade and advice. There is a sense that the city's fate is tied not just to walls and swords, but to alliances and wisdom. The king, Charles, visits again as winter deepens, travelling with a smaller retinue this time. He walks the streets in plain clothes, accompanied only by a trusted captain. Some greet him warmly, remembering that he did what he could. Others turn away, their bitterness unhealed. Charles attends Mass at the cathedral, stands beside the bishop, and even speaks to a group of children about bravery and faith. Later you overhear him in the market, promising a new well for the poor quarter and funding for the city's orphanage. His words are met with polite nods, but you know trust, once broken, is not easily mended. Life in Paris, meanwhile, resumes its eternal ebb and flow. The university reopens, drawing scholars and students from across France. You hear Latin chants and laughter in the cloisters, and see debates spring up in taverns and public squares. The poets and scribes are hard at work, turning the story of the siege into song, verse, and illuminated manuscript. Children play at being Ragnar or Charles, acting out the siege of Paris on snowy fields until their mothers call them home for supper. The season turns slowly. You can feel it in the lengthening days, the first hint of warmth on the breeze, the way the city's sounds grow brighter as winter recedes. You wake one morning to birdsong, to bells ringing, to the chatter of neighbours greeting the dawn. Paris survived the Vikings. Paris survived hunger, fear, and loss. And now, in the hush before spring, Paris waits, battered but unbroken, for whatever comes next. Spring breaks over Paris as softly as a blessing. You feel it first in the morning light, warmer, gentler, painting gold across the rooftops where snow once sat heavy. For weeks the thaw is slow, the streets slick with melting ice, the gardens outside the walls a patchwork of mud and old bones. But with each sunrise, the city grows a little brighter. Tiny green shoots nudge up between cobblestones, children shed their winter layers, and the bakery windows fog with the promise of new loaves. Paris is stirring, alive, and the memory of the siege begins, just barely to recede into something you can talk about without flinching. You wake earlier, eager for work, for the noise and bustle that mark a city healing. By now the worst wounds have begun to close, though scars remain in stone and spirit alike. There are places where fire-blackened beams still jut from half-collapsed houses, but there are also fresh ladders and piles of new-cut wood. You join your neighbours one crisp morning, helping to rebuild a small chapel by the river. As you pass bricks and tools down a human chain, someone starts a song you all remember from childhood. At first a little shaky, then swelling until the whole crew is singing. For a moment, the ache of the past lifts, replaced by something close to joy. The bishop calls for a festival of thanksgiving. Not for the victory, he says, but for endurance. The preparations are hurried but full of energy. Banners are sewn from scrap cloth. Musicians tune battered lutes and flutes. Children rehearse small plays about the miracles of Paris. There's little money for fine clothes or fancy feasts, but no one cares. The city's pride is in its survival, not its wealth. On the day of the festival, you stand in the square surrounded by hundreds, faces still thin, hands still rough, but eyes shining with a hope you thought might be gone forever. For the first time since the Vikings came, the bells ring in celebration, not alarm. The king attends too, standing beside the bishop, flanked by his soldiers. He gives a short, solemn speech. Paris endures because of her people. May the world remember this day. There are cheers, laughter, and even a few tears. You watch as old enemies share bread, as children dance, as strangers embrace. Even the youngest among you will carry these memories all their lives. The siege, yes, but also the strange warmth that followed, the understanding that together you survived the worst. As the weather warms, the city turns its attention outward. The river is open once more, and merchants arrive from upriver and down. They bring stories, some wild, some true, of Viking fleets turning on each other, of distant kingdoms rising and falling, of riches found and lost on the sea. You listen to these tales with new ears, knowing now what such legends mean in real life. Some visitors seem surprised to find Paris still standing. They marvel at the scars on your bridges, the caution in your faces, the humor you use to hide pain. You share your story sometimes with pride, sometimes with sorrow, and sometimes when the ale flows, exaggerating a little for effect. Why not? You survived Ragnar Lodbrok. The city council meets more often, their work focused now on strengthening what was once weak. Watchtowers are raised higher, new laws passed for defense and public health. The militia trains with real weapons, and every able-bodied citizen knows where to run if trouble ever returns. You see the difference in yourself. There's a readiness, a stubbornness that wasn't there before. Not everyone is so eager to forget. Some still grumble about the king, about the tribute paid in silver and gold. A few accuse their neighbours of cowardice, or worse, of having helped the Vikings. Old quarrels flare up, arguments over lost property, old insults, broken promises made in the dark of siege. But there are also acts of forgiveness, as people realize there's little sense in fighting yesterday's battles when so many tomorrows remain. The countryside recovers more slowly. You travel beyond the walls one sunny afternoon to help a friend reclaim his farm from ruin. The fields are full of rocks and ash, but already the first green is showing. The land, like the people, is stubborn. Together you mend fences, replant rows, share a lunch of bread and cheese, and laugh about the time you both hid from a Viking scout in a ditch, too scared to even breathe. The sun is warm on your back, the work honest, and for the first time in a year you dare to imagine a future that isn't ruled by fear. Inside Paris, new life takes root in unexpected ways. There are more weddings than funerals now, more children playing in the streets, more shops opening along the river. The university draws fresh scholars, eager to learn from those who lived through the Norse storm. The city's storytellers are in high demand, hired to recount the siege by every visiting noble, merchant, or wandering monk. Sometimes you gather in a tavern to hear them perform. There's always applause, laughter, even the occasional tear. You're reminded that stories, too, are a way of surviving. But not everything is easy. The scars of hunger remain. There are nights when you wake in a sweat, heart pounding with memories of shouting and fire. Some wounds will never heal completely. The city's poorer quarters bear the burden longest. There's still not enough to go around, and those who lost the most during the siege are slowest to recover. You do what you can, sharing what little you have, helping with repairs, lending a hand where it's needed most. You realize as spring deepens that Paris is different now, not just rebuilt, but transformed. The city's pride is no longer in its grandest buildings or its richest men, but in the endurance of its ordinary people. You see it in the tired but smiling faces in the markets, the patient hands at the loom, the careful way neighbors look out for each other. You feel it in yourself too, something solid and unbreakable, a lesson carved by hunger, fear, and hope. The bells ring often now, not in warning, but in welcome. Paris, once held hostage, is free, and this freedom feels more precious and more hard-won than anything you've ever known. As spring ripens into early summer, Paris takes on a brightness you haven't seen in what feels like forever. The air is fragrant with fresh grass and blooming gardens. Even the Seine, once choked with longships and dread, now glimmers under the sun, scattered with fishermen's boats and cargo barges. For the first time in months, the city's laughter is not tinged with fear. But everywhere, the story of the siege weaves itself into daily life. It shows in the way people pause to look out over the river, remembering the day when the horizon filled with dragon-proud ships. It's in the new customs that take root, the tendency to share food with a neighbor, to keep a careful watch on strangers, to gather quickly at the sound of a bell. You realize that even as life resumes, it will never again be quite as simple or as carefree as it was before the Vikings came. The repairs and rebuilding seem never-ending. On a clear morning, you help mend the last gaps in the city wall. The stones are new and lighter than those around them, a patchwork of old and new, just like the city itself. Masons work side by side with carpenters, blacksmiths repair broken gates, and everyone, young and old, pitches in to sweep, scrub, and paint. It's honest labor, and you feel pride in each stone set, each board nailed straight. The city that emerges is sturdier and smarter, its scars worn with a kind of reluctant honor. There are changes in leadership too. Some old city councillors, blamed for their indecision or cowardice during the siege, step aside or are quietly pushed out. New faces, people who proved themselves by defending a bridge, sharing their bread or organizing relief, rise up. The council debates not only how to fortify Paris, but how to share food more fairly, how to train the city watch, how to make sure the mistakes of the past won't be repeated. You're invited to attend one of these open meetings in the square. It's a raucous, hopeful, sometimes heated affair with farmers, merchants, priests, and housewives all shouting advice. You think, this is how a city learns. The king's men are a frequent presence, moving through the markets and the city gates. Charles the Bold, ever aware of his precarious reputation, wants to be seen as a protector. He visits more often, sometimes riding in at dawn, sometimes showing up unannounced to inspect defences or offer coins for the restoration of a school or chapel. There's grumbling about new taxes and occasional resentment that the king paid off the Vikings rather than fighting to the end. But most people, yourself included, prefer survival to pride. You notice new alliances forming among the guilds and parishes. Bakers band together to rebuild the communal ovens. Fishermen and farmers form pacts to keep the city supplied with food in times of crisis. Even the university scholars contribute, drafting plans for improved walls and discussing strategies for defense in lectures that draw crowds from all over the city. It's as if the siege shook everyone awake, making each person realize how deeply their fate is tied to the rest. Outside the city, the countryside hums with renewal. The scars of war are still visible. Burnt fields, ruined cottages, the skeletons of trees felled for barricades. But everywhere, there are signs of hope. Wheat ripples in the wind where ash once settled. Orchards, charred at the edges, put out fresh blossoms. You help your friend till a field that was nearly lost. Your hands brown with earth, your back aching, but your spirit high. The shared labor is its own kind of healing, and with each passing week, news arrives from beyond Paris, sometimes a cause for anxiety, sometimes relief. In the north, the Norsemen have turned their attention elsewhere, raiding coastal towns that lack Paris's new defences. Some say Ragnar Lodbrok himself did not survive long after the siege, dying depending on the teller of wounds, plague, or a feud with another chieftain. His legend only grows in the telling, becoming part of tavern song and whispered warning. There are stories of his sons vowing revenge, or heading south to seek their own glory. You listen, but after what you've lived through, you find it hard to be frightened by shadows. Inside Paris, daily life is full of these stories. Children reenact the siege in the streets, dividing into Norse and Parisians, the shouts echoing off rebuilt walls. Merchants name new breads after heroes of the defense. You buy a round loaf called Bridgekeeper and share it with friends at supper, laughing at the memories hard as they are. The cathedral, freshly cleaned and patched, is more crowded than ever for Sunday Mass, the pews filled with people determined to show the world that Paris is alive and thankful. Yet, under the surface, the city is changed. You see it in the eyes of those who lived through the famine and fear, the way they count every coin, save every crust, and look out for their neighbours. There is a new seriousness in young people's faces, a new sense of responsibility in those who might once have left everything to the priests or nobles. You realise as the months pass that the true victory is not just in having survived, but in having learned how to endure. As summer deepens, Paris hosts its first major fair since the siege. Traders come from as far away as Italy and Spain, drawn by tales of the city that refused to die. The markets overflow with goods, fabric, spices, livestock, books, and laughter. It's a celebration, yes, but also a signal to the world. Paris is open for business, and no Viking fleet, no famine, no fear can keep her down for long. One night you walk home through lamplit streets, the sounds of music and conversation drifting on the air. You pause on a bridge, the same bridge that was nearly lost, and listen to the quiet slap of water against stone. The sky above is velvet dark, pierced by stars. Somewhere a church bell tolls the hour. For the first time since that dreadful spring, you feel something close to peace. Paris, the city once held hostage, is free. Her walls are stronger, her people wiser, her future, while never certain, full of promise. You tell yourself, whatever comes next, you will face it as you faced the siege. Not alone, but as part of a city that remembers and endures. And as you slip home, the dawn already lightening the rooftops behind you, you know with quiet certainty, Paris will never be the same. But Paris will never fall. As high summer sweeps in, Paris finds a new rhythm. The old haunting silence of siege is replaced by the constant sounds of living, a city humming with ambition and a little hard-won joy. You wake to the clang of hammers, the call of vendors, the shouts of children tumbling down streets that once served as battle lines. For the first time since the Viking fleet's arrival, hope seems to outweigh fear. Still, no day passes without some echo of what Paris has endured. You see reminders everywhere. Some scars are physical, the repaired but mismatched stones in the bridges, the blackened timbers in shop walls, the places where new construction rises stubbornly from old ruins. Other scars are quieter but deeper, the wary way people glance at the horizon, the tendency to gather at the first sound of alarm. the seriousness that sometimes clouds a laugh. Paris has survived, yes, but survival changes you. Many Parisians, yourself included, look for meaning in the ordeal. In the university, scholars debate what the siege says about fate, leadership, and the will of a people. Some priests claim it was God's test or punishment. Others say it was the city's own courage, not any miracle that brought deliverance. In taverns, men and women compare their stories, each adding a detail, a twist, a little bravado. You hear how a housewife stood firm with a pot of boiling water, how a merchant bribed his way past the Norse, how a teenage boy snuck messages through the siege lines, hidden in loaves of bread. Paris's legend is now made of thousands of small acts of defiance and kindness. Yet with the threat past, other troubles emerge. The city's poor, who suffered most, clamour for more help. Some accuse the council of hoarding food or money, and old resentments flare up between neighbourhoods, between rich and poor, between native Parisians and refugees who have now become part of the city's fabric. The council debates new laws, how to share grain, how to train the watch, how to defend the city if when the Norse or any enemy returns. Charles the Bold visits with less frequency now, leaving much to local leaders who find themselves suddenly responsible for the future in a way that kings and bishops never quite are. Despite these tensions, life is undeniably better. The harvest is strong. Fields that were ash and mud just months ago now sway with golden wheat and tall beans. Markets are bustling. Artisans take on new apprentices, passing on skills that nearly vanished in the famine. Even the river, once so menacing, is now crowded with commerce. Its traffic a reminder that the world still turns and trade still brings its blessings. The bells ring for weddings more often than for funerals. You notice a growing impatience among the young, a desire to seize life, to create, to dance, to sing, to love, simply because they can. Cathedral, newly repaired and resplendent, has become a symbol not just of faith, but of endurance. On Sundays you stand in the crowded nave and look around at faces old and new. The prayers are fuller now, more thankful and more direct, no longer asking only for survival, but for wisdom, for peace, for a future worthy of the suffering that bought it. Travellers from other lands still arrive, eager to see the city that stood against the Norse. They marvel at the rebuilt bridges, the walls adorned with new carvings of saints and angels, the bustling squares. You find yourself showing them around, pointing out the sights of battle and sharing the stories you remember best. Sometimes laughing, sometimes somber, you realize that in a way, you are now part of the city's history, a living witness to what once seemed impossible to survive. The stories of Ragnar and his fleet have already started to become myth. Some say he was a demon, others a tragic hero. Songs are sung of his cunning and cruelty, of Paris's desperate resistance, and the king's fateful bargain. Each retelling shifts the balance. Sometimes the Norse are monsters, sometimes almost admired for their daring, but always, in every story, Paris is the city that would not die. As the anniversary of the siege approaches, the city prepares for a day of remembrance. The council organizes a great procession, banners are hung, bread is baked, candles are placed at the bridges and gates where the fighting was fiercest. You join the crowds as they wind through the streets, pausing at each scar, each monument, each grave. The bishop speaks, reminding everyone of the cost and the meaning of their endurance. The bells toll once for every 10 who died, a sound that seems to roll endlessly over rooftops and river. In the evening, the city gathers in the main square. Musicians play, children recite verses, the old and the young sit side by side. People share food, stories, tears. As the stars come out and the square fills with lantern light, you find yourself overwhelmed by a mixture of sadness and pride. You survived. The city survived. And together, you shaped a new chapter in the long story of Paris. There are no guarantees that the Norse or hunger or war will never come again. But the city is stronger now, wiser, more united. You look at the faces around you, friends, mangers, strangers, and know that if the worst returns, you will meet it not with panic, but with the hard-earned courage that comes from having already survived the unthinkable. You fall asleep that night to the sound of distant singing, the soft lapping of the Seine, and the quiet knowledge that Paris, once held hostage for gold, is now truly free. Summer wanes and the heat softens, but the pulse of Paris grows only steadier. You notice the smallest things: markets filled with late peaches, the chatter of women spinning flax in the doorways, the bright colours of new cloth hung out to dry. It is, for the first time in years, a season of plenty. The city's storehouses are full. Fishermen pull fat pike and eels from the river. The fields yield more grain than anyone dared hope. For many, it feels as if Paris is being paid back for every privation, every bitter day of the siege. Even those who once muttered about paying gold to the Norse now toast to the king, to the city, and even half-jokingly to luck. Yet you can't help but sense how deeply the ordeal has shaped everyone. The city is friendlier, yes, but also watchful. Nightly patrols are now routine. The city gates are never left unguarded. Older men teach younger boys how to defend the walls, and women instruct their daughters in the best ways to hide or flee if ever the need returns. The lesson of the siege is woven into every story, every song, every rule and ritual of daily life. Some days you walk out to the rebuilt farmlands, joining in the last of the summer's work. You hear old farmers talking about the Vikings not as monsters but as men who gambled and lost, or perhaps won more than any of them could count. One of the most remarkable changes is the rise in civic pride. You see it in the faces of your friends when they talk about the city's future, in the way artisans compete to outdo each other with their craft, in the serious debates held in the newly rebuilt town hall. The young seem particularly restless and ambitious, keen to leave their mark, as if surviving the siege has convinced them that anything is possible. New guilds form, trade increases, and even distant cities send envoys to learn from Paris's resilience and its new defensive strategies. Some evenings, you sit by the river with companions, watching the barges drift under the starlit sky. The old talk softly of their fears. What if the Norse return? What if another enemy comes? But the young answer with laughter and bold promises, their confidence unshakable. Let them come, someone shouts. We'll make them pay twice as much next time. You find yourself changed as well. You are slower to anger, quicker to share, less trusting of easy assurances, but more willing to work and sacrifice for what matters. The memory of hunger has made every meal precious, every friendship a kind of miracle. The city's leaders do not let the threat fade from memory. Each new recruit is taught the lessons of the siege. Public drills are held every month. At the council meetings, grain stores and weapons are inventoried with careful attention. Trade flourishes as never before. The fairs draw travelers from across the realm. Ships from distant ports unload salt, wool, and spices. The inns are full, the taverns noisy. Stories of the city that would not fall spread to every corner of France and beyond. You hear rumors of kings and chieftains sending gifts, eager to be remembered as friends of Paris. Still, Paris is careful. When a rumor of new Viking raids reaches the city, the bells ring out and the streets fill with watchful citizens. But it is a drill, not a disaster. This time, Paris is ready. There is relief, a little laughter, and beneath it all, pride. The city has learned not just to survive, but to stand strong together. As autumn winds down and the leaves drift from the trees, Paris glows with a golden light. You look out over the city at sunset, rooftops warm against the cooling sky, and think of how far you and your city have come. The road ahead may yet hold hardship and threat, but you know deep in your bones that Paris is not just a place on the map, but a living thing, a heart that beats with the courage and stubbornness of all who call it home. You head home through streets alive with laughter and the soft sound of evening bells, knowing that, at least for now, peace has found a home here. Paris, once a city held hostage for gold, is now richer than ever in wisdom and strength, and in the memory of how a people, when pressed to the brink, discovered their true worth. By the time the last leaves have fallen and a pale autumn moon hangs over Paris, it's clear the city has stepped into a new era. The threat of the Vikings lingers only as rumor now, a story to be told and retold, but no longer a terror that stalks the dreams of every Parisian. For all its scars, the city is bustling, inventive, and perhaps for the first time, truly united. You feel it everywhere, in the way people nod to each other at dawn, in the songs drifting from tavern doors at dusk, in the careful, almost loving repairs to the city's battered bridges and gates. Everywhere, reminders of the siege are now woven into the fabric of daily life. The stone bridges, once choked with barricades and blood, are now symbols of hope. Children dare each other to run across their length without stopping. Lovers linger in the golden light, as if to claim the spaces once reserved for soldiers and fear. The city's cathedrals, cleaned and rebuilt, draw crowds at every mass. You notice how the prayers have changed, not just pleading for safety but for wisdom, gratitude and the ability to forgive. The council, reformed after so much turmoil, proves itself wiser, if not always more peaceful. Debates still grow heated about taxes, trade, defense, but now the memory of what's been endured hangs in the air, a quiet moderator reminding everyone that unity is more precious than pride. Those who rose to lead during the crisis are respected, their advice sought. Even Charles the Bold, once scorned for paying off the Vikings, is now remembered as the king who saved Paris. The city's poets and painters, scribes and songwriters immortalize him and others, weaving truth and legend into a tapestry that will outlast any generation. In the neighborhoods hardest hit by siege, something like renewal takes hold. You visit often, helping where you can, teaching a boy to read, carrying timber for a widow's new roof, planting winter crops in a field once trampled by invaders. These small acts, repeated by many hands, begin to erase the sharpest outlines of grief. In time, the ruins themselves become places of community. Market stalls pop up where houses burned, a new playground rises where a barricade once stood, and the main square is the site of both memorial and celebration. As the year draws to a close, you attend the city's annual Feast of Remembrance. It is no longer a somber affair, but a grand, boisterous celebration. Tables grown with food, root vegetables, wild game, honeyed cakes. Even the rare luxury of imported oranges, wine flows, music plays, and everyone, young, old, rich, poor, finds a place at the table. There are toasts to the living, to the lost, and to the city itself. During the feast, the bishop rises to speak. His voice is strong and steady as he tells the story of the siege, not with bitterness but with gratitude for endurance, for the everyday courage of so many, for the simple gift of survival. He leads the crowd in a prayer, then invites the children to recite a new poem written for the occasion, celebrating Paris's bravery, resilience, and hard-won unity. As you listen, you feel the weight of the past year lift you just a little. You see the faces around you, weathered, lined, but bright with laughter and relief, and understand that these are not just survivors, but architects of a future built from the hardest lessons of history. After the feast, you wander through lamplit streets, arm in arm with a friend. The city is quiet, the moon high and cold, the river shining silver beneath the bridges. At every corner, candles burn in windows, tiny flames of memory, hope and thanksgiving. You pause on a bridge, gazing out at the water, and marvel at how far you've come from the day Ragnar Lodbrok's fleet appeared on the horizon, to this night, full of music and promise. The city's story is not finished, of course. There will be more storms, more famines, perhaps more invaders. But now you know, deep in your bones, that Paris can endure anything. The lesson of the siege is not just about fear or gold, but about what a community can become when pushed to its very edge. That night, as you drift off to sleep, the sounds of celebration linger in your mind. Bells ringing, glasses clinking, the echo of children's voices reciting, Paris endures, Paris remembers, Paris stands. And now, as the fires burn low and the city falls quiet beneath the velvet hush of night, you let your body relax. The echo of axes and horns, the rush of feet on stone, and the shouts of defenders on the bridge all fade away into memory, distant and harmless now. You feel the softness of your blanket, the slow, safe rhythm of your own breath. Paris is peaceful, and so are you. Let the last images drift through your mind. The laughter at the feast, the warmth of neighbors gathered in the square, the golden dawn breaking over walls that were nearly lost, but never broken. Whatever hardships remain, you know now that hope endures, and that every dark season gives way, eventually, to light. You are safe, you are home, and all is well. The city's story is written in stone and in the hearts of those who survived, and now In the gentle quiet, you can finally rest. Let the silence settle. Let your eyes grow heavy. Tomorrow will bring another dawn. Paris endures, and so do you. Sweet dreams.